Are you just starting your online business only to find that things aren't going as planned? You've been listening to this podcast, you've been watching training videos and taking courses, but when it comes to actually implementing, you keep running into roadblocks. Everything takes longer than you expected, and even when you put something out there, it doesn't gain the traction that you were hoping for. When you're just starting out, you are not going to be good at this, and that's okay. I've been there, my clients have been there. Even the most successful entrepreneurs you hear about today had to struggle through this phase. In this episode, we're talking about what to expect in the early stages of your online course journey, and more importantly, how to use a failure as a tool to push you forward instead of letting it hold you back. You're listening to the Online Course Show, where we dive deep into the strategies and tools that help online course creators build thriving businesses. I'm Jacques Hopkins, and over the past 12 years, I've built a successful online course business teaching piano that's brought in over $4 million, and I'm here to share the lessons that I've learned along the way. As many of you know, if you've been following this podcast, I'm currently on a several-month RV trip around the US with my family. And guess what? I'm brand new to RVing. I cannot tell you the amount of research I did prior to our trip. I watched countless hours of YouTube videos. My wife and I made all the checklists. I even had mentors with decades of experience teaching me. We were as ready as we could possibly be. But our very first 24 hours went pretty terribly, despite our preparation. And it's because we just hadn't done it yet. But we learned, we got better. And yeah, I'm sure there will be more bumps along the way, but I promise you we're better at it today because we've actually been doing it instead of only learning. So here's what happened in those first 24 hours. We leave our home in Louisiana and we start the drive east toward Florida. This is the very beginning of January, as we're essentially spending all of January in the Florida Keys to find as warm of weather as possible. And that first drive itself actually went pretty fine. We arrived in a small town in the Florida Panhandle a little before dark and started the setup process when the first problem arose. My wife noticed a screw in one of our trailer tires. Now, we didn't freak out. We prepared for this. We knew this was something that could go wrong. We had a patch kit, but I only wanted that for absolute emergencies. We also got good insurance with roadside assistance, and in this case, we had the time, and I wanted an expert to look at it. So within an hour, John showed up and took care of us. He put the spare tire on, and we made a plan to take the tire with the screw in it to a tire shop once we got to our first multi-night destination in South Florida. So the first problem was solved smoothly, and we naively thought that would be it. Later on, it's about 9 p.m., and we're getting ready for bed. I plug in my phone to charge it and notice that it won't charge. It turns out that we weren't actually getting power. I thought we were because the lights were working in the camper, but it's only because we were using the camper's battery power. So the troubleshooting began. Keep in mind, my wife and I both have degrees in electrical engineering. So we have diagrams out. We're talking about different equations. We're troubleshooting why the power at the campsite is not working for our camper. And that's when our youngest daughter comes in to where we were from her room, which we thought they were both sleeping at this point, and she tells us that she swallowed a magnet. Actually, that she swallowed 2 magnets. See, my wife put up these really cool magnetic boards by their beds so they could attach pictures and whatnot with magnets. And I guess my daughter was so bored and so badly didn't want to go to sleep that she was playing with 2 of the magnets and got curious and put 2 of them in her mouth and accidentally swallowed them. I immediately called poison control, and they said if it was just 1 magnet, no problem. She would pass them. But since it was 2 magnets, we needed to go to the emergency room ASAP, because if they are separate, they could try to reattach in her body and cause damage. So I immediately pushed the power troubleshooting aside and went into protect my daughter mode. I looked up the nearest emergency room about 15 minutes away, but then I realized that my truck was still connected to the camper. So our setup for this whole trip is a travel trailer being pulled by a truck. And we did it that way on purpose so that when we get places, we can detach the truck and still have a vehicle to go places. But on one-night stops, the plan was to leave the 2 connected so we can get up and hit the road again the next day. And I did read before the trip that really the only downside to this is if you have an emergency situation and need to go somewhere in your vehicle in a hurry. Well, here we were in that emergency situation. So I went out and as quickly as I could, I disconnected the truck from the trailer. Now at this point, I'll tell you that I didn't do everything to my trailer setup when we were first setting up at that spot that I would have done if I knew I was disconnecting the truck. More on that in a bit. So I disconnect the truck and we head to the emergency room. Long story short, my daughter is totally fine. They did an x-ray and the 2 small magnets were connected in her stomach. So they said we could treat it as one magnet and she would pass them no problem. Obviously a huge relief because before the x-ray, the doctor mentioned probably having to take an ambulance to a hospital an hour away where they have a pediatric surgeon. So good news there. And this was weeks ago now, so my daughter's completely fine. We head back to the camper where my wife and oldest daughter were waiting the whole time and get to bed about midnight that night. And then the next morning came. So remember how I said I didn't do everything to the setup that I would have if I had known we were disconnecting the truck at that spot. And one thing you have to do when you're setting up is get the trailer level. And this particular campsite was actually especially unlevel. So that meant raising up one side's tires up on this leveling device. And I didn't properly secure that device because the truck was securing everything. And as I was taking things down, basically the trailer lost control and fell off all of its leveling blocks and came crashing down to the ground. The front and the side of the trailer both fell down to the ground about 6 inches with the rest of my family inside. My wife came out of the camper screaming, worried that something had happened to me. And it was a very, very scary moment, but everyone was okay. And incredibly, all aspects of the trailer were okay too. I raised it up off the ground. I did a thorough inspection, finished our pack up, and we were off. The rest of the trip has gone pretty smoothly so far, but I will say that my wife is absolutely paranoid anytime she or we're inside of the trailer that is just going to go crashing down to the ground because she experienced that. But I promise you and I promise her, I'm not going to make that mistake again. So those first 24 hours or so at that first campsite were very, very interesting. And as I was thinking about all of these things that went wrong in those first 24 hours of the trip, I couldn't help but think how prepared I thought we were and how it's hard to be great at something no matter how prepared you are when you haven't actually done it before. So many people fail with their online course business because they give up when things get hard. We could have packed it up at that point and headed home, chalking it up to RVing just isn't for us, but we didn't. We pressed forward. We visited Florida's 3 national parks. We swam with dolphins. We went snorkeling and saw lobsters, incredibly colored fish, even saw a shark. We saw manatees, alligators, and crocodiles. We had an incredible time as a family, and it's been just really amazing so far, but that wouldn't have happened if we gave up when it got hard at the beginning. And when I started my online piano course business 12 years ago, I was terrible at that as well. It took 3 years to see any noticeable profit, and that's because I had never done it before. I had never created videos. I'd never built a sales page. I'd never sold anything before. My implementation wasn't good, but it got better and better the more I actually did it. I remember one time I tried my hand at a live webinar. I had heard other people being wildly successful at webinars, so I thought that might be the key to my success. And I'm not proud of this, but I was so nervous about low turnout that I actually logged into the webinar as fake people from multiple other computers, so it didn't look like a ghost town if anyone did show up. Well, I think only one real person did show up, and I had my fake 3 people in there as well. And I was literally interacting with myself, meaning those fake people, to put on a show for that one real person that showed up. And as you can imagine, I didn't make any sales on that first webinar, but the execution was so bad that even if 1,000 real people were on, I doubt I would have sold anything. But my second webinar was better, and my third even better, and so on. Because sometimes just doing it is the key to getting better. At this point, I've done several webinars that have done 5 figures in sales. At this point, my webinar is evergreen, meaning pre-recorded, and that alone is responsible for multiple 7 figures in sales. So a webinar is just one thing you could be doing in your online course business. And I just wanted to use that example of one of many, many things that I did not do well at first. So if you're thinking about starting a course business, please know that you are probably not going to be very good at it at first. And if you're already started and things aren't going well, recognize this is likely why. Make sure you're learning from what you're doing so you can keep getting better. In the introduction of my piano course, Piano in 21 Days, so in the introduction lesson, I share this diagram called the Journey of Transformation that I learned from one of my favorite authors, Mike Michalowicz. On the very left, we have the choice because you are dissatisfied with something. I share this with my piano students so they know what they can expect as they go through the piano learning process. They are choosing to learn piano with Piano in 21 Days because they are dissatisfied with not being able to play the piano. And at the beginning of your online course business journey, you are making a choice to create an online course because you're dissatisfied with your current work situation, or you're dissatisfied having the amazing knowledge you could share and help with others, but it's not helping anyone right now. Then we move along the diagram and things go up. You're committed and you're optimistic, but that's when things start going down and you're putting in effort. You're putting in work without reward, and you're starting to get dissatisfied. This is where there's this dotted black line back to the beginning called shiny object syndrome, because this is where many people give up. My piano students may stop when things get hard and try another method or just give up on that dream entirely. For you and your course business, this is where you might try another niche or maybe a completely different business model. But that's typically not the right path to take because you'll end up in this cycle of continuing to start over every time things get hard. And things will get hard. You will put in effort and not see results. But you have to remember your driving purpose. You have to learn from your mistakes. You have to get feedback. You have to keep iterating and being consistent. Eventually, and the timeline is different for everyone, but eventually things will turn up and you will start getting results. You'll start getting rewarded for the work you're putting in. You'll start gaining momentum, which eventually leads you to the transformation. So I love this diagram. I thought it was a great illustration of what we're talking about here. But like I said, I also share it with my piano students at the very beginning of the course. Like once they're signed up, it's the introduction lesson. So feel free to use this diagram as well at the beginning of your course too. But remember what we're talking about here today. Right now, I'm back in my home office because we're actually just in the middle of our trip right now. Home was on the way from the east to the west where we're heading next. So no, I am not an expert RVer at this point, but I'm definitely on that upward trajectory and am so much more confident and just better than we first started because now I've actually done it. Thank you so much for tuning in here to episode 251 of the Online Course Show. Thank you so much for being here. Take a second and hit that like button below this video if you've gotten any value out of it. And finally, if you are at the beginning stages of your online course journey and want some help to make the process a little easier, a little faster, then make sure you check out my Genesis coaching program. Genesis is there to give you the training you need, but also there for you when you hit the obstacles and roadblocks in your business so you can get the feedback and support to keep going. To learn more and apply, head to oc.show/Genesis. Thank you so much for listening to another episode. Don't forget to take action on what you've heard here today. I'm rooting for you.